G'day and thanks for joining us for another Australia Talks. I'm DK and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Ardeet. Today is Thursday, the 30th of April 2026, and our topics this week are, is it time to tax gas more effectively? That is liquid natural petroleum, liquid gas. The gas you use to cook, not the gas you put in a car for our Americans. And NDIS reforms. NDIS reforms, the elephant in the budget. Of course, we have our Two Ticks Down talk, and then we'll jump into This Week in Australian History, and we'll finish off, as always, with the 4X bottle top trivia. I'm going to apologise already to you because the third question, I'll be astounded if you get this one, but I thought it was quite interesting. So apologies in advance. Make sure you stick around for that, though, because who knows? Some of our listeners might get it. But before we get into all of that, let's catch up with the last week after Croc Watch.
Let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom, as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it because, in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
We often talk about crocs and farming, croc farming and that. So, look, this month and next month, I just want to give you an overview of the whole industry in Australia. And that's something we can reference in the future. It's just interesting. We've always sort of been around the edges but never dived into it. So, look, in this, I'll do it in two parts. In this one, I'll go through the egg collection, the incubation, hatching and rearing in captivity. And I'm concentrating on the Northern Territory because that's the main area for croc farming. There's a few in Queensland and one in Western Australia. And I'm also talking exclusively about Crocodilus porosus, the saltwater croc. And also worthwhile pointing out that they do a lot of sustainable, well, not do a lot, they are a sustainable ranching industry, limited captive breeding under strict rules, and there's a national code of practice on the humane treatment of wild and farmed Australian crocodiles. So the first part, as you'd imagine, the egg collection. During the wet season from November to March or April, the female salties build nests of soil and grass near the water bodies in floodplains and wetlands, and they lay about 30 to 50 eggs in each of them. So under these regulated ranching programs, there's licensed farms, Aboriginal ranger groups and collectors who they get a quota of viable eggs, and depending on the year, it's anywhere from 60 to 90,000 in the Northern Territory, which says a lot, but there's a lot of bloody crocs up there.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of surprised that they get wild eggs instead of have a breeding program, but I guess the population's probably so big they don't really need to spend the resources on a breeding program. They can just take them out of the wild.
Yes, and I suppose in some ways you could argue that's a bit more humane than, sort of having full-grown crocs in captivity just for producing the eggs. So I think there might be some of them. I don't know the answer to that, but when they talked about how it's being limited rearing in captivity, limited breeding in captivity. Look, that's a plausible reason, but I don't know the full answer to that. Makes sense to me though. And look, if you don't have to set it up to have all these croc farms breeding up and keeping the adults in there, that probably makes sense. And two, if you're talking 60 to 90,000 per year, and that's just taking a few eggs, like within a quota from each of those nests, you'd have to have a lot of crocs in captivity.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah. So collection, the collection's done carefully. Who would have thought? As we've seen, you see with the people coming down on either from helicopter or going in from boats. Because strangely enough, the female crocs aren't too keen on having their eggs taken. So all that sustainable harvesting, there are fewer than 3,000 adults in the early 1970s. Today, they reckon there's about 100,000. So it's been interesting how by taking less, they've actually got more. It's worked as a program very well, and it's created, a viable industry. So they get they try to get eggs that have been laid only within the last few hours, and they mark them and do all their stuff that they need to make sure they're packed gently and not overheated or jolting. So when one say bring the eggs back, it goes into artificial incubation as you'd expect. They're in controlled incubators. They're constant temperature, 31 to 33 degrees Celsius, humidity above 99% and good gas exchange. There's no free water touches the eggs, and they sit there for about 86 days. So obviously they monitor them closely. They get a better return than in the wild, because in the wild you start to get flooding, overheating, predation, and they can apparently adjust the temperature slightly to favour male hatchlings, and they grow faster and reach market sooner. So it's interesting to be able to do that little tweak of nature.
Yeah, I think there are some animals where you can do this, where if you increase the temperature, it's like they'll only become male or something like that. I'm not sure the exact biological mechanism for it, but I think it's not just crocodiles that you can do that to. I think it's sure. other reptiles and things.
Yeah, nature's pretty impressive. So they check to make sure that everything's happening. If they need to help some of the weaker ones get out, they might help with the slightly opening the eggs, and then the newly hatched crocs get washed with warm water, moved to a hatchery building where the temperature is between 32 and 34 degrees Celsius, so they can finish absorbing their yolk sac, and that careful part there really increases the survival rates. And at the end of the day, it's a you had to jump through a lot of hoops, and you're wanting to preserve it and get the best bang for buck, but they're also wanting to get a profit. So it's one of those nice things where profit meets environment, and it seems to be working. I mean, obviously, not everyone's going to agree with us on that, but that's the reality. In my opinion. And then the rearing in captivity, the young crocs, the hatchlings, they're in specially designed facilities. They're in hatchery pens. They've got shade, basking areas, water that's deep enough so they can go under it. There's strict densities for how much they stock them. So it's usually about 10 to 15 hatchlings per square metre of water and land. And this number gets reduced, obviously, as they get bigger, because they also want to minimise aggression and skin damage, because the end product of this, aside from meat, is valuable skin. So they don't want their crocs fighting because they're too crowded. So it's an interesting sort of feedback loop from the consumer end in this industry. I thought a little bit more interesting than what I thought. Nothing that sort of surprised me, because I thought, oh yeah, of course, you don't want them damaged. But thinking what you have to do. So 3 to 7 times a week they get fed. It's like special mince, high quality animal protein, and that makes up 15-20% of their body weight at optimal temperatures. They change the water, and then they grow into juveniles after about 9 to 12 months, after which they go to larger outdoor pens. In some of the remote community programs, so the locals will rear them to about 80 centimetres or 1 year of age, and then sell them to larger farms. So overall, they're raised for anywhere from 1.5 to 3 years. Might go a bit longer depending on growth rates and what the market need is, but they take them up to about 1.5 to 1.8 metres, or a bit more in length. So through that, they're doing the biosecurity, monitoring health, grading animals by size to reduce competition and quality, and also to comply with the National Code of Practice for Humane Husbandry. So of the roughly 25 farms in Australia, Northern Territory's got 14 of them and accounts for about 90% of skin production. So that's the first part. Next month, we'll cover the slaughtering, the skinning, the processing, and the markets. So look, that's your journey with me through the digging into a few details of the croc farming for this week in Croc Watch.
Very good. Very interesting.
Croc Watch.
All right. How's your week been, other than researching crocodile breeding?
Yeah. Well, look, most of the podcast know I had a hernia operation last week. That's why we were a day early with the podcast. All went well. I expected it to go well. You know, these things are done regularly, and it was using the robotic surgery, which I had a lot of faith in. So certainly, like, had the surgery in the morning, and by the afternoon I was quite able to get out of bed. You know, obviously a bit of discomfort, and they had on some mild painkillers. I suppose it depends for everybody, but basically I was just on Panadol, and only had two things, once in the middle of the night and one just before I went home, of the slightly stronger one, but didn't have to get onto the opiates at all, which was great. Because if I can avoid them, that's fine. I don't want all the sort of constipation and other things. And it's just handy not having to have that stuff go into the body anyway. So it's been a very gentle recovery process. You know, I'm sort of lucky in that I've been able to be able to have a bit of a rest, and because I've slept a lot more than what I usually do, because the body's healing. It's had these arms down in the gut and going right down to the sort of the groin area, and it was a reasonable size hernia. But yeah, it's I'm probably more impressed than what I thought I was going to be. Excuse me. I figured it was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to go this good. And I did get to see the Da Vinci robot in the theatre, which I was keen. So when I went in there, I was sort of craning my head around. I thought, there it is. And I sort of spotted it, and I heard the anaesthetist say, we'll just put a bit of medicine in the thing. I thought, yeah. And I was just about to bend the ear of someone there to say, ask them about the robot, because it just looks so... it's my stupid thing to say, so robotic and big and white and clean and futuristic. It was just about to ask that, and to set it kicking and bang, I'm in recovery as it goes.
Yep. As so happens, you can't fight it once it goes in. No, it's just, I mean, it's not even as if you think, hang on, it's just bang out, I'm awake. Yeah, it is. It really is. It's just, yeah. It's scary how instantaneous, because you don't dream or anything, you're not.
No,
it really is just an instant later, and you're there. Very just sudden and black. It's like that time has just been skipped.
Yep.
So
that's all gone pretty well. So look, really, that's been my focus. Catching up on a few bits and pieces. Just sort of officey stuff that has to get done, that just keeps chugging along, but looking after self, healing up, and feeling very good, feeling well and truly down the recovery path. So I got 6 weeks of not being able to lift more than 5 kilos, and then I should be set.
Back into fighting condition.
Back into fighting condition. That's exactly right. So what about you? What have you been up to, DK?
It's been busy, and at the same time, like the weather's been frustrating me. We've had scattered showers over the last week, which is just like, I know I whinge about the weather a lot, but I'm doing a lot of outside stuff at the moment. But this is particularly annoying because these are heavy showers, but they're really brief. It might only be 5 or 10 minutes, but you'll get maybe 2 or 3 mil in that time. So it just dumps. And so everything's just wet, and then it stops. And you're like, thanks. That's just what I wanted. Everything just to be soaking wet. And now it's gone and the sun's back out. And you're just like, okay, thanks. So that's been quite frustrating. We've basically had that for the week. Of course, over the weekend, we had Anzac Day, which is always a very somber, emotional day, I'm sure, for a lot of people. In particular for my fellow veterans here in Australia and of course in New Zealand as well. And around the world on the days that they have to mark those occasions as well. So look, that's always sort of a, I don't know. It's a day of complicated emotions. Let's put it that way. And I was lucky. I had a good friend and fellow veteran come around, and we sort of watched the footy. Had way too much to drink, and I actually woke up on Sunday with a hangover for the first time, I think, this year. So
wow,
I don't mind a drink. Old. Yeah, but I don't often get a hangover. I normally, I'm sort of cautious of them because I'm in my mid-30s now, and they are not like they used to be. So try and avoid those. But yeah, this one snuck up on me. But that's
here either.
No, I've heard that. I'm scared. I feel like they're nearly killing me now. So. But look, that was pretty much my last week, and this weekend is going to be a bit weird for me as well because my parents are going away. So we're having Mother's Day a week earlier, and this is your reminder. It is not Mother's Day this Sunday coming.
Good call.
It is in the following week. I'll remind you again next week, but if you're listening to this now going, oh, that's right, now's the time to do stuff because there is still stuff in the shops. There is still cards and things like that floating around, right? So get into it, jump onto it, and make sure that you get yourself sorted. If you're in Queensland or I think the Northern Territory as well, you've got no excuse because Monday is a public holiday. It's Labor Day. So you've got a long weekend ahead of you to get yourself sorted for the next Sunday, the 10th of May is Mother's Day here in Australia. All right, let's get stuck in. We got a big topic up top. Should we tax the gas we export more effectively? Just a reminder, this isn't gas, the liquid gas you put in your car. This is like petroleum. This is liquefied natural gas that we're talking about. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, straight up, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has very quickly kiboshed calls for a 25% tax on gas exports, at least in the upcoming federal budget, which is echoing criticism from the gas industry and industry insiders. So, yeah, maybe there's a bit of lobbying going on, I'm sure. But let's get stuck into it. The windfall profits tax, they have argued, this is the gas industry, would alienate key buyers such as Japan, Malaysia, and South Korea, and the very countries now prioritizing liquid fuel supplies to Australia. Proponents have dismissed that argument. Buyers, they say, would be completely unaffected by the proposed new tax, arguing that gas exporters are merely blowing smoke around the key issue. Our tax system, they claim, has failed to deliver the bounty from the nation's riches to the owners, that is, the Australian people. In particular, the Petroleum Resources Tax no longer works as intended, raising only a tiny fraction of the revenue that it should. We'll put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that in a minute, and I'll explain exactly how that works. According to the gas giants, they pay substantial amounts of tax already, about $20 billion a year between them, which would be imperiled if they had to pay export tax, so they say. But of course, all companies pay taxes. The difference with resources is that the companies are exploiting natural endowments that they don't own and which can never be replaced. Well, certainly not in any realistic human timeframe. Ken Henry, the former Treasury Secretary and one-time National Australia Bank chairman, returned to Canberra and sat before a Senate inquiry last week, urging Australia's elected leaders to stop selling the country short. He put it quite simply, quote, I put this proposition to you. I'll sell your house and I'll give you 30% and I'll keep the other 70%. And you should be happy with that because I've just converted an asset into cash. None of you would be stupid enough to do that. Yet this is what the Australian government and the Australian Parliament do in respect to our gas reserves. End quote. And quite frankly, it's pretty hard to argue with this example there. So let's explain this issue quite simply. Over the last decade, Australia has become the world's second largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, second only to the United States. But while the gas is extracted from beneath Australian soils, the profits almost go entirely to large multinational companies. Research suggests gas companies have made roughly 149 billion Australian dollars from exports in just the last 4 years, and only a small fraction of this profit has been taxed. So, let's come back to the petroleum resources rent tax that I mentioned earlier and explain exactly how this is meant to work in theory. Australia's main tax on gas exports is this petroleum resources rent tax. Profits made by companies running oil and gas projects are taxed up to 40%, and at present, this tax mainly applies to offshore producers. Well, this sounds really good, actually. The tax is less effective in practice. The energy companies have access to generous tax deductions as well as uplifts, which allow companies to use the losses from one year to offset the amount of the tax they pay the following year. The rationale for allowing uplifts was to incentivize companies to invest in Australian oil and gas projects by letting them recover the costs. The problem with this system is it allows oil and gas companies to pay very little, if any, tax on their profits. As a result, economists and policy analysts have argued that this tax is no longer fit for purpose, particularly given how much gas we now export. Onshore, liquefied natural gas producers in Queensland are exempt, but they're still required to pay the standard 30% company tax rate. But oil and gas companies are often able to reduce how much they pay here too, using various deductions and accounting practices, which is pretty standard stuff. This is because the money they spend on construction, drilling and infrastructure is immediately deductible. The governments of the states where onshore gas companies are active also impose royalties. These are payments which mining companies must make to the owner of the natural resources, which in this case is predominantly the state government, but not always. And they pay this royalty as the right to extract them. Royalties are different from taxes in that they are payments for the right to exploit a public resource. And the royalty rate is based on the raw value of oil and gas produced rather than the profit. Companies must pay the royalties even if a project is losing money. In Queensland, gas producers pay between 5 and 10% of their revenue in taxes. This can generate significant income, but nowhere near as much as a profit-based tax designed with fewer loopholes. This is because royalties, as they currently stand, do not scale with profitability. Australia's main gas export industry has long been underregulated, particularly on the East Coast. For many years, producers have simply exported as much gas as humanly possible. So, what can we do? What do other nations do? I think that's a good place to start. Let's have a look around. Nations such as Norway tax their natural resources exports much more robustly. The Norwegian government applies two taxes to petroleum profits, a 22% company tax and a 56% special petroleum tax, which means companies are taxed at roughly 78% of their profits. It's the taxation rules are stricter and more standardized, meaning companies have less scope to carry forward large deductions. The funds raised go to the Norwegian government pension fund Global, previously known as the Petroleum Fund of Norway, which is now worth more than $3 trillion. As far as a sovereign wealth fund goes, I believe it's one of the biggest in the world. And the fund was established back in 1990 to shield the economy from oil industry validity. The Norwegians knew that this resource would not last forever and the market wouldn't last forever either. So they did something about it. Gas giant Qatar also has a high taxation system, giving it a large share of oil and gas profits. Qatar uses these funds to establish healthcare, education, and public infrastructure. That'd be nice. Even countries with limited domestic energy resources use these sorts of taxes. Back in 1978, Japan introduced a tax on oil and gas imports, and this tax generates significant revenue, raising roughly $8 billion in 2025 alone. And do you know where half of that gas, a large percentage of that gas that they taxed came from? Do you want to have a guess?
Couldn't be further down south, could it?
Yes, it was from Australia. The Japanese government is taxing imported gas from Australia, and the Japanese government are making more tax revenue on the gas that we sold them than we are. What? Yeah. So I think it might be time that we have some guts and actually invest in the future of our country and stop ripping off the Aussies. And let's be honest, we're ripping off our future, basically. So let's talk about tax reform. Let's profit from it and let's invest in our future. What do you think about this? I know taxes can be a bit of a, not your favorite topic, let's put it that way. But do you think we're getting rorted here? Is enough's enough and we need to do something? Or do you think it's maybe not that drastic?
Oh, I think it's drastic. Look, this is a difficult one for me because, as you said, I have very strong opinions on taxing and the bureaucrats who do it. So my instinct is to naturally push back against any proposed taxes, not least of all because I never trust where they stop. So that's my personal feelings towards it. However, if I put feelings aside and try and look at it with a little bit more, I suppose, objectivity and frame it in a different way. Something I feel like, I feel like my view is that this is a national asset. And yes, you can say states have got different assets. States have got different amounts of different things. Gas isn't everywhere over there. However, it's so large and so integral to the very continent which we expect government to manage that I consider this a national asset. And when I frame it that way, I think it's a national asset that is being managed poorly. And this isn't a Labor thing or just a Liberal coalition thing. This is both of them. This is this is nothing new about this. This is a decades old problem, and neither of them can point fingers at the other. They do, of course. It's politicians and that, but no. This to me is a fundamental mismanagement by our government and a failure in their duty. Now, does it mean the answer is 25% tax? Does it, I don't know what the answer is actually going to be, or even though I can, I probably do err towards something on the taxation side. But whatever the answer is, the fact is they haven't done their job, and they haven't done their job properly. And the argument to support that is the industry is demonstrably, not theoretically, but demonstrably able to bear a higher cut being given back to the point of origin, as we've seen by Norway and by Japan. Now, it sort of freaks me out a little bit hearing Norway's got whatever added up to 70 odd percent. But the fact of the matter is there's still companies out there, there's still people out there who says, no, I can still make my money from that. And to think that you couldn't make money from this national asset that we've got here in Australia with higher rates of tax on it or royalties. As I said, I don't know what the mix would be. Are royalties better? Is it a mix of royalties and tax? Is it a case of remove a lot of loopholes and simplify the taxation? Is it something new, or is it a combination of all of them? Do we try something where we do put the tax on, but we also give favourable conditions to the miners and explorers? And we say something like, listen, there's a certain amount we're going to have to suck up on the environmental side. This is because this is what's happening. Or they say, look, you'll be allowed to have access through here. Yes, we might have to put a road through a forest, but provided it's within these parameters, we're going to live with that. A bit of guts and strength and leadership. Whatever that mix turns out to be, it's not the mix we've got at the moment. And the mix at the moment, I think, is really just letting gold and treasure just slip through the fingers of the Australian people. I thought it was, I was a bit surprised with Albo, because he's put his he's generally been stepping pretty well, but when he started to come out with talking about this and saying he's essentially not going to bend to some populist demand, which is a very derogatory way of framing what is the will and desire of, I would argue, the majority of Australian people. I'd say there's very different opinions. As I said, I've got my opinions, and I just said I don't know what the final mix would be. But I think there's very few people out there who look at this and think, oh no, we're getting good value for money. I think most of us look at it and think, listen, this is just a bit dodgy. We should be getting better value out of what's coming out of the ground, and the government needs to be doing a better job, and the lobbyists and the companies need to be having less effect in there. I suppose it's one of those things that more than one thing can be true. There's certainly a lot of argument to say if you put a higher cost on extracting this product, and Australia's not a large market, but when it comes to gas, we have got a pretty decent demand, particularly on the East Coast. But more than one thing can be true. It will have an impact on some explorers and some producers, and if they're operating on thin margins, it can well and truly tip them over. So to say that there's these rich fat cat corporations up there who we can tax to almost ridiculous levels is incorrect. But it's also true that you can you have an obligation to act in the national interest, and therefore you have an obligation to try and extract more value out of this, which means you have to have the guts to stand up to what is a very powerful lobby and what is very sophisticated lobbyists, and an industry that gives politicians a lot of money. And as we know, you get a lot of bang for your buck from your dollar by giving pollies money. So I don't know if we're going to see the real guts come out in the politicians. I'll say I'll go a bit hopeful, and I'm partially hopeful because if any of them is sticking their head out of Parliament House in Canberra and putting their finger in the wind, you just got to look at this and say this is a potential winner. Now, even if you come up with a half-assed plan, it's probably going to be better than what's happening at the moment, which is just, oh yeah, we've got the rules in there, we can't do much about it. No, we're not going to do about it. We'll just keep going our own way. I think there's enough people out there who've had enough of this, who are incentivized enough and will vote enough to say, no, let's try something else. And if it doesn't work, well, great, it doesn't work, but we've been doing the same thing for so long, and it just seems to be a drain on the economy. So look, that possibly surprises you a little bit, given how I feel about taxation, and that, however, in the framing of it being a national asset, government needs to step up and do their duty, and they're not doing it, and neither side's doing it. So that tends to be how I look at it. How about you? How do you feel about the situations that currently is? Do you have any opinions on what needs to be done, and do you have any opinions on how government has handled it so far?
I am almost like really frustrated at you because I wanted to have a big argument about this, but the reality is I think you really summed it up quite well. Look, I think I'm much the same. Where I'm always cautious about introducing new taxes or tax reform just in general, because it can go too far. It can kind of like stifle things as well, and I think there's a balance that always needs to be struck. But I do think now is a good time for reform in this industry. I understand gas is expensive to set up. There's a lot of infrastructure costs. There's a lot of upfront overheads. Before you start making a dollar, you got to spend billions, right? Broadly speaking, that money has been spent. That money has been recouped and has been reinvested into these companies. I feel like I would feel less strongly about this if a lot of these companies were also Australian owned. Broadly speaking, the vast majority of them are not. They're bigger multinational, they're the usual names you would expect. They're the BPs, they're the Exxon Mobils, they're the Chevrons and so on and so forth. So these are absolutely incredibly huge, incredibly powerful multinational corporations, which, look, there's nothing wrong with big, very powerful multinational corporations. But at the end of the day, they do not give a crap about they would steal our gas if they could, right? At the end of the day, that is their underlying message, is to make as much money as possible. And I'm a capitalist. I don't have a specific problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the government needs to have the balls to rein them in and regulate this industry properly and go, we are the second largest exporter of LNG in the world today. Why are we not benefiting from it? Why do we have an economy that feels like it's built on sand? Why do we not have, we're scraping by for infrastructure, for defense spending? We're about to talk about the NDIS and how that needs to be reined in because it's become too expensive. I'm not saying that we could have our cake and eat it too if we did have gas reform, but there would be a lot more money in the kitty. And I think the average Australian's lifestyle would be significantly better. These industries they employ a lot of people, but it's not like earth-shattering amounts of people either. And so I think, there is a balance that needs to be struck, much like you said. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know the details. And I think the problem with these sorts of reforms is it very much does depend on the details of how this is going to work. I think, broadly speaking, a tax system like this works best if it's very simple, very cut and dry with very few loopholes, which I do not trust any major party in this country to actually implement, quite frankly. They love their loopholes and their write-offs and their this, that, and the other thing. And look, it can definitely be beneficial for certain people and businesses. But there is a time where it's kind of like, look, you guys have had the gravy train has been running now for quite a few years. You guys have made a silly amount of money, and now we need to rein it back in. You've paid off the vast majority of the infrastructure that you've built, and so let's start paying your fair share, so that the people who own these resources can benefit. And so, like I said, don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know if just a flat 25% tax is the right way to do it. I don't know if it's a combination of taxes and royalties, or if there's some sort of windfall tax, or the specifics of how to do this is very much like the weeds of this is very important. The details are very important to get right. I don't have any major hope that any major party in this country is actually going to have the guts to do it properly. I think the Greens might propose something, but it's very easy to propose something knowing that it's probably never really going to get anywhere, and then they can point to it and go, look, we did something. I think One Nation is absolutely not going to do it because they may make noise about it for the political win, but I don't think they're actually going to do anything because the mining and fossil fuel industry is their number one supporters, basically, of One Nation. So a lot of lobbying goes in that case. So I don't think One Nation is going to save us in this respect either. What I think is...
It doesn't leave many, does it?
No, it basically means there's nothing. We're screwed. Labor, look, the pressure on Labor at the moment is quite strong. Like you said, if you ask almost any Australian about how they feel about this, once they understand the problem, I think 99% of Aussies would go, tax it. Like, why are we waiting? Why are we even having this conversation? It's so obvious that we are getting rorted in this situation. And oh no, Shell might not make $20 billion in profit this year. They might only make 18. Oh, where? Come on. You know, like it's a feeding frenzy and we're just getting taken advantage of. And like, I almost hate this topic because it makes me sound like I'm some sort of socialist or something.
Yeah, I know.
but you got to pay your fair share, right? And we're just getting rorted, and it's not on. It's un-Australian is what it is, which makes sense because most of these companies aren't Australian, right? But I think there's a lot of political pressure here, but unfortunately, unless people keep the pressure on, I don't think much is going to change anytime soon. The next distraction will come up and then it'll get dropped and so on and so forth. So I know there's some pretty vocal people that are really pushing for this, and I think that's great. Keep up the good fight. We may come back to this topic as it continues to grow.
I can almost guarantee you we will. If this, I know you said that thing that, something else shiny and glittery comes along to distract us. I think this has still got a lot more legs, and I think one of the people who is particularly prominent in pushing this, David Pocock, an independent based in Canberra, and probably one of my favourite politicians in this current lot. He I don't see him letting this go anytime soon, and he's got. I think he's got a lot of political savvy. He's come a long way very quickly and got a lot of attention. So he's obviously pretty good at the game, and he's right on this. So I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. I don't think this one's going away easily.
I hope so. I hope this doesn't go away easily and it lingers around, because I think that we do need to have a real serious conversation about it and come to realize. I think more Aussies should be angry about this. And this just, comes back to that lucky country situation where we are lucky that we have so much, but man, are we not smart about how we use it. Yeah. We're getting ripped off. Now, I do think I would, reading the body language of Albanese in some of these press conferences, I do looking into sort of the way he talks about it. I think there's a bit of an awkward situation for him. I think probably personally, he probably agrees that maybe we need to do something about this and there needs to be a reform. However, I think he's quite cautious of doing anything right now because they've just been on this whirlwind. Himself and Senator Penny Wong have just been on this whirlwind tour that we spoke about through Southeast Asia, particularly Japan, Malaysia, and South Korea, to secure and prioritize liquid fuels to Australia, refined petroleum products. And so they're very cautious probably right now of rocking that boat. They've just made some deals. Let's not screw it up. And I think you can have your cake and eat it too in this situation. I don't think the boat is going to be rocked. The companies will whinge to the ends of the earth about this.
And they'd be silly not to either.
Oh, of course, I would too. You know, don't take away my toys. No. But at the end of the day, they're not gonna pack up and walk off. They're on such a good deal anyway. I think there's a lot of room to turn the screw, and you don't necessarily need to go really hard straight away either. You can kind of ratchet it up over a couple of years or something like that. But I think they need to do something, and I hope that political pressure stays on. Hopefully, Pocock, like you said, continues this, and there are others that are sort of pushing for it as well. So, as I like to say, let's watch the space and fingers crossed that some form of government, don't know what it's going to look like, has the guts to actually make reforms.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for our Twitix Town Talk.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert square, man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
All right, this week we're travelling over to Western Australia, speaking about minerals and oil-rich areas, to Bunbury. And the growth of this town, which became a city in 1979, echoes the growth of the business we'll be discussing this week, which had its roots in Bunbury. So Bunbury is 175 k's south of Perth, about 108 miles. European exploration of the area began in the 1650s with Dutch, French, American and British seafarers. The French Bourdin expedition in 1800 mapped the coast and named the estuary Port Leschenault. Lieutenant Henry William St. Pierre Bunbury explored the region in 1836, and in 1838 Governor James Stirling named the town site after him and granted land there. The first European settlers, John and Helen Scott and their family, arrived that same year to establish a farm. Early trade involved supplying fresh meat and veggies to North American whaling ships, and shipwrecks such as the Samuel Wright in 1840 actually provided salvaged materials for building, which I suppose a silver lining, but yeah, not good for the ship. But you can understand, don't let it go to waste. Growth accelerated with convict labour, and they came in and they drained swamps and built a timber jetty, made roads and bridges, and then the South Western Railway linked Bunbury to Perth in 1893, and of course the gold rushes of the 1890s brought further development. So Bunbury became a municipality in 1871, a town in 1961, and then a city in 1979. So it's pretty quick, you know.
That's so quick. Just
Very.
boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, boom, boom, boom. Exactly right. In fact, it's West Australia's third most populous city. So in 21, it had a urban population of just shy of 80,000, and it's the main regional centre for the southwest area down there. So it depends on mining, mineral processing, agriculture, timber, the port, retail, services, and tourism. And the local mob there, the Wandandi Noongar people, are part of the broader Noongar cultural bloc. They've lived in the southwest area for more than 45,000 years, and they know the area as Gumburup. And the Gumburup area was a seasonal gathering place. It was rich in food sources and ceremonial sites, and early Europeans noted large groups of Aboriginal people in the region. So after colonisation, there was the usual differing views of land use that led to clashes and marginalisation. It sounds trite when we say it, but we say it so often. But that's the reality. There's a lot of Aboriginal people employed in the growing town, but they had controls placed on their movement, marriage, and employment. But the Wandani people served in both world wars. And then in 2016, Western Australia legislation formally recognised the Noongar cultural land connections and provided funding for cultural and educational programs. So a couple of interesting facts about Bunbury include its 19th century reputation as the Brighton of the colony. the Brighton being that beachside beachside area in England. So during the gold boom, it became a popular seaside resort for miners. And to me, it's funny. It's not really the image I have of miners, and you sort of wonder if they're lying there, whether they can't help themselves. And after the holiday period, the lifeguards are going around having to fill all these new bloody holes in the beach. Bloody miners. So he's also got a long history of shipwrecks, 29 recorded in the aptly named Shipwreck Bay. And many of those also supplied early building materials. And one event that's not really well known outside of WA was in 1976, where two environmental activists bombed the wood chip export terminal in the Bunbury, in what was known as the Bunbury wood chip bombing. So they had more than 1,000 sticks of gelignite that they planted. It caused damage of about $300,000. Fortunately, two charges failed to detonate, which limited the impact. No injuries. A security guard was held at gunpoint, though, and shrapnel hit some of the nearby residential areas. So the intention was to prevent the export of wood chips from Western Australians' old growth forest for 18 months. But the reaction was considered a serious setback for the emerging environmental movement of the time. And I've left a link in the show notes if you're interested in more details of that. But that was something that didn't really ring much of a bell for me. However, the focus of this week's Two Ticks Town Talk is a business that got its start in Bunbury. And as soon as you hear the surname of the founding brothers, you'll know what one we're talking about. So let's go way back to 1886, where a business was founded by brothers Arthur and Robert Bunning. Yes.
I know where this is going.
Yeah. So they were tradesmen who emigrated from East London and born into a carpenter's family. They turned up in Fremantle on the SS Elderslie in 1886, 29th of June. They were originally intending to go on to California, but they stayed on after visiting their sister and brother-in-law. So they formed the partnership Bunning Brothers in 1886 and initially won government contracts, construction contracts, and building expansions to the Fremantle Lunatic Asylum, Roebourne Hospital, the Well Club and Trinity Church in the early 1890s. And they also built up a property portfolio that included 4 brickworks. So they were hard workers, very entrepreneurial as well. So they had a lot of trouble getting jarrah timber during the export booms of the 1890s, so they decided to enter sawmilling. Bought their first sawmill in southwest Aussie in 1887 and another at North Dandalup a couple of years later, and then they got further mills across the regions, and they ended up becoming one of the largest exporters of railway sleepers in Western Australia. 1907 they incorporated as Bunning Brothers. Robert Bunning died in 1936 at a dinner in Perth, marking his 50 years in Western Australia, apparently 5 minutes into his speech, and keeled over and carked it, unfortunately. I suppose he did see how it developed to a certain stage, but yeah, a little bit of probably not the best way to celebrate. He's understating that. No. You sort of hope that this is great. I'm just looking forward to a fantastic future. Oh, feeling a bit peaky. His 3 sons, Charles, Tom and Joe, took over the family business. So despite a whole lot of challenges of World War II, during which the company pivoted to shipbuilding for the Allies, they grew after the war amid the housing boom. 1952, they became a public company, and that was Bunning Timber Holdings Proprietary Limited, and supplied timber for hundreds of thousands of homes over in WA. So they'd already secured major contracts for the timber fittings in Perth buildings in the 1930s and supply to the Eastern Goldfields and railway sleepers. But this post-war expansion was a big growth spurt for them. Set up a workshop in Manjimup, Wills in southwestern Australia, and even up as far as North Queensland. So a quick growing. The shift towards the more familiar retailing front that we know today, that started in the 1950s. So they purchased a whole lot of hardware stores and opened the first dedicated hardware store in Perth in 1961. Charles and Tom Bunning became joint managing directors in 56. And in 1970, the company acquired merchandising and sawmill operations from Hawker Siddeley, which essentially doubled their size. And then in the 1980s and 1990s, they just acquired a whole lot of other related companies. So by the 1990s, they'd actually reached the East Coast and had adopted their warehouse style format. 1994, Wesfarmers acquired Bunnings Limited for $600 million. And that marked the beginning of its transformation into this national, international retail powerhouse. Wesfarmers opened the first big Bunnings warehouse that we know, like that we recognise now, in Melbourne in 94, and expanded rapidly, opening stores at an average rate of one every 3 months.
Whoa!
Yeah, that's crazy.
I do remember them expanding like really aggressively. Like they went from like nothing to everywhere, seemingly, in the mid to late 90s. But that's crazy.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you probably wouldn't have, you would have been a bit more of a little tacker then, but it was it was just so. It was just such a growth, a new business presence that it was just astounding to many people who were taking note at the time. So I haven't held Wesfarmers shares for a while, but that activity, it certainly incentivised me to invest at the time. It was one of those ones looking at thinking, you guys are either going to fall over or you're not stopping for a long time. So that one actually worked out well for me. They introduced the red hammer symbol in 1995, and the slogan, lowest prices are just the beginning, which is just, I think most people know that, in 1996. And in 2001, they acquired the Howard Smith Group, which included BBC Hardware and Hardware House, which were still at that time, or probably not at that time, but leading up to that time, you sort of looking, there's the big competitors, I wonder how they go. And it was almost in one fell swoop. Nope, they're all Bunnings now.
I do remember there was a hardware house. I can't remember exactly where it was, but I do remember it. I feel like we drove past it one day and the next day it had Bunnings on it. And I was just like, whoa, what the hell? Like it happened so quickly. They're so aggressive with their expansion. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and that might sound like a bit of an exaggeration to a lot of people, but they've got the team there, and you see it stop, okay, then sit down, and then the painters come in and bang, it's up, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, there's always a Bunnings there. It's impressive. And where are we? So 2004 to 2008 acquired the Mitre 10 saws with ACCC approval. And then Bunnings entered New Zealand with more substantially after the 2001 acquisition, growing from 3 stores before to 14 stores by 2008. So the Wesfarmers strategy, they emphasise customer focus, lower prices, widest range, best experience,
they did that investment in community engagement. I mean, there's the iconic sausage sizzle that people know about and we joke about, but also the DIY workshops and things such as in-home installations and tool hire. And then during the COVID-19 period, they really launched into the click and collect and e-commerce capabilities. They really didn't skip a beat.
No, they really didn't. They were so on top of it, which is so impressive. Like, I feel like that's just a good way to describe them. They just do what they do really, really well. Yeah, exactly.
The company's only major misstep, now they obviously have little small bits and pieces, but they had one major misstep, and it was a beauty. It was the 2016 entry into the United Kingdom and Ireland. They bought a mob over there called Homebase for £340 million. And their plans are made to rebrand stores within 5 years. So they opened their first rebranded store in St Albans in January 2017. Again, didn't really waste much time, followed by others. But the venture just failed rapidly. And then in May 2018, just a couple of years later, they sold the operation to Hilco for £1 after £1, resulting in a $1.3 billion write-down.
Wow.
Yeah. So 24 stores were rebranded back to Homebase, with some closures under voluntary administration because it was right for the pickings. So the failure was attributed to unsuitable product ranges for the UK, such as barbecues, not as popular there as here. There was an inability to understand local consumer preferences, and there was a lack of local goodwill, and that was compounded by Brexit-related challenges. And it's been described, justifiably, as one of the most disastrous retail acquisitions in the UK. Now, one thing I would note, though, is they bought Homebase in 2016, and despite the huge amount they'd already spent, they didn't fall in that into the trap of the sunk cost fallacy. And getting out only 2 years later, taking on the chin and moving on, to me, is a sign of strength. So my opinion is there's a very positive aspect to it, that the organisation was strong and sensible enough to look at it and say, this is only going to get worse. We've made a horrible mistake. We're out of here. That to me says a lot for a company. I know people might view it a different way, say, oh, what a big cock up. But you look at it deeper, and I think it's very telling. So,
yeah, no, I'd agree with that. They realised that. They've realised a mistake, and like you said, they didn't go into that cost price fallacy and decided, let's just cut our losses. This isn't working. Clearly, I think they've misread the market over there, thinking
wildly.
that they could take what's been successful in Australia and New Zealand, because obviously culturally we're very similar to the UK, but clearly not enough that, and I've briefly lived in the UK, and I can say that sort of like DIY culture is there, but it's nowhere near as strong as it is here. I feel like you see a Bunnings in even little towns, there's Bunningses. Everyone loves a Bunnings.
Yeah, exactly. So today they operate 382 stores across Australia and New Zealand. So 285 warehouses, 67 small format and 30 trade centres, plus 112 Beaumont tiles and 17 toolkit depots.
They own Beaumont tiles. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yes. So that's for a total of 511 locations.
Wow.
Yeah. Employs approximately 53,000 people and holds just shy of 70% of the Australian DIY hardware market. And they generated revenue of 19.6 billion with net income of 2.9 billion. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Do you know
It's
the
a behemoth.
The most surprising part about that was that they control, what did you say, 70?
Yeah,
70
68%, so nearly 70%.
So almost nearly. I'm surprised that that's not higher, if I'm honest. I feel like...
You're surprised that percentage isn't higher or the revenue?
Yeah. No, the percentage isn't higher. I feel like Bunnings almost have a monopoly here on DIY. So it's kind of surprising. Well, I guess they almost do, but I don't know. I would have thought that would have been in the 80s, perhaps. But there you go. There's a few other hardware stores holding on.
Well, I think I think it probably comes down to how you're defining DIY. If you're doing places, if you're concluding saying places that sell tile, other wood yards, tool places like Sydney Tools and Total Tools.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you'd be pretty happy with 70, but I get your point from first glance. So, like our two-ticks town of Bunbury, Bunnings has gone from strength to strength. Bunbury from municipality to town to Western Australia's third largest city. And Bunnings from timber milling to hardware stores to one of Australia's most recognised and successful businesses. And I love that all started with a couple of brothers who thought they'd give it a crack.
What a great Australian success story. And for any of our international or Australian listeners that are wondering, the incredible animated TV series Bluey, Hammer Barn is what they call Bunnings. And Bunnings have very much leaned into that. I think they even rebranded a couple of their stores as Hammer Barn. And you can buy Hammer Barn merchandise in Bunnings, including like the gnomes from Bluey and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I went crazy a little while ago and bought a bunch of it for my daughter, who just is obsessed with Bluey. So I know a lot of our American listeners probably are quite familiar with Bluey. I believe Bluey is the number one American TV, like the number one show on American TV, period. Not just kids show, just the number one show.
Yeah.
It is wildly successful. And Hammer Barn is quite a big part of plays a role in quite a few episodes, which shows you how culturally, how big of the zeitgeist Bunnings is. We love our Bunnings. I was there today, actually, so I friggin' love the place.
Look, it's one of those things that there's a part of you sort of think, oh gosh, it was nice when you had the little hardware store and you could go in and buy, I'll have 7 of those screws and 7 of that, and there's the thing of it's a big chain thing and that. But there is so much that they get right that it's compelling.
It is, and I just like walking around in there. I don't know, I just like going to Bunnings.
It's not just a bloke thing either. I think there's such a range. And I think possibly, that's also part of it. There's, male or female, and for kids. I mean, they've even got those little, little trolleys for the kids. They've got if it's not a little play area, at least, areas where there can be activities for the kids. It's one of those things too where it can be, a bit of cheap entertainment, because it's exciting to our senses being surrounded with a whole lots of little interesting things. It does something to us as humans. And Bunnings isn't the only one that has lots of little interesting things. So it is something that you can recognise that, but that is part of their draw as well. And there's I don't know. Look, I'm guessing there's a lot of psychology goes into it, because there's also a sense of space. Rarely do you go in that it's uncomfortable environment. If it's really cold outside, it's not too bad inside there. If it's really hot outside, it's not too bad inside there. But it's always a bit better in than out. And I don't know how much they spend on air conditioning or whether it's design or whatever it is, But there's obviously a team of people there who's just nailed this model.
It's I would say that their energy costs, which we have spoken about before in terms of them trying to, reduce their energy costs with solar and stuff like that. Because a lot of Bunningses now are what I would call like lightly air conditioned. It's not cold when you walk in, but it's definitely like there is climate control. It's not to the same as other retail spaces, but it's active. It's definitely on. It takes the bite out of the humidity when you walk inside. And a lot of Bunnings like stores are colossal. They are huge. Our local one is, I've actually just measured it on Google Maps, not including the car park, just under the garden centre and the undercover roofed area is a whopping 17,500 square meters, which is approximately 4.3 acres of shed building, basically, that you can walk around in. That does include the quite a large trade centre, which is over an acre by itself. But to like as a store, it is hands down the largest single building probably in my small regional city. It rivals the size of the shopping centre just by itself as a single retail environment. So, I feel like a lot of towns almost Bunnings becomes like the cultural heart of the town. Like everyone knows who the Bunnings is. It's wild. It's such a cultural cornerstone in this country. It's crazy when you think about it. Yeah. But yeah, love me some Bunnings. What an interesting Two Ticks Town Talk from such humble beginnings.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, let's move on. NDIS reforms, the elephant in the budget. Australia's National Disability Insurance Scheme, also called the NDIS, has grown too big, too fast. The NDIS is a government-funded program providing support for more than 760,000 disabled Australians. It launched way back in 2013 as a way to make disability support more accessible and equitable. But public support for the NDIS is faltering. It's one of the most expensive items in the federal budget, expected to cost taxpayers more than $50 billion this year. And it is a flawed system in need of urgent reform. Last week, Health Minister Mark Butler outlined plans for a sweeping cuts to the NDIS, saying it was costing taxpayers far more than first intended and its future was at risk without a course correction. To its credit, the Albanese government has taken a series of steps in its first term to contain the cost of the NDIS, which we spoke about a couple of years ago when we did our budget review. But Health Minister Butler made the stark admission last week that those had barely touched the sides. I think both of us mentioned that at the time. And yet another multi-billion-dollar cost blowout was looming for this year's budget. Under Labor's new proposal, which will see funding cut in real terms for the next 4 years, the 2030 cost is estimated at just $55 billion. The scale of the transformation is clearest in its human terms. That is, 160,000 people will be taken off the scheme within the next 4 years, reducing the number of NDIS participants from 760,000 to approximately 600,000 by the end of this decade. I don't like saying that. I feel like we just got into the 2020s and now we're talking about the 2030s. Anyway, the change will also prevent another milestone, and that was looming the elephant in the budget, as I like to call it, by the end of the decade. That was that the NDIS would cost more than the entirety of Medicare and the pharmaceutical benefits scheme combined if things went unchecked. It would be, I think, the second largest cost in the budget behind the pension. For Butler and the others in the cabinet, many of whom were part of the government that created the NDIS, That fact necessitated a radical shift to bring the scheme closer, if not all the way, to what they had originally imagined it would be. But reversing a trend, a decade in the making, in the space of a single budget makes for sharp and painful change that has already generated uncertainty and apprehension among those who access the scheme. Meanwhile, the opposition has warned that the reforms risk pushing many people out of the scheme without adequate replacement services. Shadow Assistant NDIS Minister Henry Pike said that the government had failed to be upfront about the financial impacts on its participant. He said that the opposition supported genuine reform of the scheme, including a move towards functional assessments and stronger cost controls. But the bottom line is that the current NDIS system is financially unsustainable. I feel like I've said that before.
Yeah.
So the government must act quickly to moderate its growth. But reforms also need to ensure that the most vulnerable people are cared for appropriately. Personally, I do not envy those that have to make these tough choices. Ardeet, how do you feel about this? Right now, I mean, the details are sort of muddy. We don't know exactly what's going on, so we can't talk in depth about the reforms that are needed to take place. But based on what we know, how do you think this will pan out?
Well, okay, how do I feel about it? How do I think it will pan out? It's something
just a couple of easy questions, you know.
Yeah, how I feel about it is it can't be ignored, and the cuts are a necessary evil. Unless it's cut, it'll essentially cease to exist. I feel very frustrated by this because it's another example of just poor planning and what I think are a number of easily foreseeable problems that were going to come about. There shouldn't be anything in here that either side of government says has taken them by surprise. Let me walk that back. That's unfair because there's always things that can take you by surprise. But the way that it's been set up, as I understand it, and it's a very complex thing, so I'm not pretending I have any great in-depth understanding, but the way that I understand it, it's something that I think many of us could have looked at and said, I think that's going to get rorted. You haven't got enough auditing in there. You haven't got enough. I think one of the things that's been a kill shot for this is coming out and finding out that most of the providers are unregistered. Yeah. I think that's one of the things. Like I heard it at first. When I first heard that, I thought, "Oh no, that can't be right. That there must be some qualifier or context in that." Nope. There's just been no registration and very little oversight on providers that are billing the government and therefore the taxpayer for services.
And it's not a small amount of money either.
No. Oh no. No, it's literally billions. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're talking that amount of money, and I think it's one of those things that there can be a very simple story. It's part of a simple story saying this is costing too much. Part of the reason big reason it's costing, or depending how you're presenting it, most of the reason it's costing too much is because it hasn't been managed properly, and that's because so many of the providers are unregistered. Because even most of us at a basic level prick up our ears and say, well, how could you possibly be involved in something that big and not have to undergo even basic scrutiny? I mean, obviously there's going to be some sort of checks and that, but that you're not having to go through a process, you're not having to jump a couple of hoops to ensure that people who are just looking at it as an easy way to rort the system, that's not in place. I think has really struck a nerve with a lot of people. It certainly did for me, and it's something that just I see coming through as a current when this gets discussed. And the problem is this also goes to how I feel about it as well. I think most of us support the concept of an NDIS. We've got some, we've got some wealth in this country, and I think with a lot of us think, well, I want to support people or want something in place where people who genuinely have a problem, a disability that is genuinely life-affecting and debilitating, having some structure out there in which they can be supported, tends to be something that a lot of us can agree with. And, again, it's one of these things of me philosophically, ideologically thinking, well, I would hope that could provide a different way other than the government. But the reality is that's the system we're in. And I think seeing that is part of what the generosity we need to show as a community. Unfortunately, in similar way to what it sort of ties in, I felt there was a bit of a similarity here with this and the gas tax there. It's like people are looking at this and thinking we're being taken for a ride, and not just taken from a little bit, but taken from a lot. No,
because it's not any significant amount of money. Like this is huge. Like I think what's so difficult to talk about this is the moral issue is like significant, right? You don't want to. It becomes very easy to go, let's just throw the whole thing in the bin and start fresh, which is not a realistic solution, because too many, the most vulnerable people in the country rely on this program.
Yes.
And I would say the vast majority of them are not the problem here. Like 99% of them are doing the right thing. They are the victims, essentially, if you want to describe it in that way.
Yep.
And that's what the problem is here, is we need a rein in the NDIS, and most providers are doing the right thing too, but there are a few that are just rorting the system. Overcharging, charging for services that aren't there. Like you said, the registration thing is a problem. I think the overwhelming growth is just a huge problem as well. Not in terms of the budget growing, but the number of people on the program growing.
Yeah.
It was expecting that by the end of by 2030 there would be over 900,000 people on the NDIS or some form of the NDIS. Now, I should clarify. It is massive, and I should clarify as well. The vast majority of people, it's something like almost half of the people that are on the NDIS don't receive that much funding. And it's quite limited in what they can actually access in terms of like quote unquote benefits that they are provided through the NDIS. I think it's something like less than 10% of NDIS participants equate to something like 70% of the budget, and it's
right.
What you think. It's the people that are extremely, like, severely disabled, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, that require, you know, constant nursing, 24-hour support, special facilities, those sorts of things are obviously where the major financial burden is. And no one is really talking about reforming that level. There are certain things that they're looking at in terms of, I think, what do they call them? It's like an aged care facility, but for disabled people. I can't remember the exact term off the top of my head. they are looking at potential reforms there because, again, is the quality of care sufficient? We know that aged care has had its fair share of issues, and we're seeing the same sort of issues cropping up in the NDIS programs. Because, again, the whole point of the NDIS was that the government will fund it, but private industry will provide the services. And I think that's kind of been great in a lot of ways, but also there's this certain people have seen an opportunity to take advantage of the system. Mm. And I also think for a lot of participants, because the kettle of money that they're drawing from isn't like cash that they can use for anything else. So they kind of, it's not that they don't care, it's that they're not as obviously aware of the cost associated with their care as, say, if you were paying for it out of pocket or if there were more restrictions around it and so on and so forth. So I think the NDIS needs significant reform, and not just we're kicking a bunch of people off the program to make it cheaper. I don't think that's a genuine solution to this problem. I think we need to reform a lot of it. And a lot of it is young kids with autism or autism spectrum disorders that need support in the community. I don't see why some of that can't be supported by the states, which is what some of it they're talking about. Some of the care facilities, I think, again, could go back into the state health services. So I think there's some low-hanging fruit that they can really easily go, yep, we're going to nip that in the bud. We're going to do this. We're going to roll it into the state healthcare services, and we're just going to control it. And it's 100% not going to cost anywhere near as much as the NDIS
Does that
costs.
mean you're thinking that if it gets into the control of the state, that there'll be better oversight? Is that what you reckon?
I think it would be, because if you can roll in the certain care, a good example would be something like occupational therapy or physio and stuff like that. The state health services can provide those services, providing they get the funding boost. I can tell you now it's almost definitely going to be cheaper to the government than through private practice. Now, this is where the complication comes from, because, of course, you don't want to kill industries overnight by just going, nah, you're not doing it anymore, we're going to do this instead. But at the same time, if you've got a business that is entirely propped up by a government program like this, you basically a government employee at that point with extra steps anyway. So part of me is just like, let's be ruthless and find a better funding solution for this, because unfortunately, private industry isn't providing a cost-effective solution, which is what it was supposed to do. And I think in some ways the NDIS has failed in that, which is quite frustrating. So this is where the state has to come in, a bit like our first oil, where they need to step in and regulate it in a better way. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I do know there is some low-hanging fruit that I think they could quite easily go, we're going to take this and we're going to roll it into this, and we're going to fund it through this part of the budget. And, we're going to throw money at the state health services specifically for these programs.
You might have to sell me a little bit more on this state side, because to me, if you're spending let's say our podcast spends $100, and I pay for that $100, and then we say, oh no, what we'll do is I'll pay for 50 and DK can pay for 50. There's still $100 coming out of the podcast, and analogously to that, if you're putting the costs onto the state, just because the states are paying for it, I'm struggling a little bit to work out how that's going to make the overall cost to the Australian economy cheaper. Or is it because you're saying that something, because it's one level down and more localised, that there's naturally going to be more control over it? I'm not quite getting you on that.
I think there's a couple of things One is it will genuinely be cheaper if it's a state government employee. For example, let's take a big chunk of the NDIS budget, which I think is low-hanging fruit for reform, is ASD kids, right? So autism spectrum disorder. And these kids vary in their abilities, capabilities, and of course, they all need their own individualized healthcare, right? So no one disagrees with that. What I think is a structural reform that they could do is employ a significant number of therapists, so occupational therapists like OTs, speech therapists, and other allied health workers is the word I was looking for, within that space, that therapy space, as an example, and employ them under the New South Wales Health Service, right? Queensland Health. Give them a facility. So you may have to spend some money up front to do this, right? You may have to build a new facility, or there might be facilities available, or whatever, or put them in the schools, which they already do. At least here in Queensland, I know for a fact, they have speech therapists and other therapists that go around to the schools to assist with these kids in their learning environment and things like that, right? So instead of spending $250 for a 50-minute session through the NDIS today, you are not going to pay that employee that much money to do that job as a government worker. So straight away, you've already cut your outgoing cost for this specific program, not by half, but let's say it costs two-thirds as much.
Big dent.
Yeah. So straight away, boom, the quality of care is probably similar. It might not be quite as good, and they might have limitations in the services they can provide because you're obviously changing it. But that is a sacrifice that's going to have to happen, unfortunately, because you can't continue through this process as it exists today.
No.
Right? So something has to give somewhere, unfortunately. And that's like everything, right? So as an example, I think that is just a low-hanging fruit that can be immediately, boom, there's a reform straight away. What we're going to do is we're going to fund the individual state health services with the proviso of this is what it's for. We are giving you a list of names of children who are part of this program. We are handing it over to you. Don't cock it up because it's on you as the Minister for Health, right? So here's your new portfolio program. Here's the money to fund it. And hopefully it will be considerably cheaper than the equivalent in the NDIS. And these small private providers are going to be very unhappy with this. Absolutely, 100%. But unfortunately, the money that they're charging is phenomenally high.
Demonstrably not working, is it?
It's not working. The quality of care may be decent, but I know quite a few. The reason I'm talking about the ASD kids things is because I know people that work in this space, and I know people that are part of the NDIS through this program. So I have a bit of firsthand knowledge in how this works, and I can tell you now it's not working as well as it could, and it's certainly not working for like. I don't want to say they're getting ripped off. The government's getting ripped off, but there are people getting rich off the NDIS.
Yeah,
and that shouldn't be allowed. So,
no.
Well, it's not that it shouldn't be allowed, but like, in
terms of it being done as an unsupervised cash cow. I mean, if people provide great service and great value, I'm all for them getting as rich as possible. But we're talking about somebody who's worked out a rort.
Pretty much, exactly. They've looked at it, gone, yep, sweet, cool. And I guess this is where I have a bit of trouble too, is because I know some of these providers are not, the business owners are not qualified. They've kind of seen an opportunity, they've jumped on it, and I don't have a problem with that at all, but I do think that this needs to be reined in. They are taking advantage of the tax base. They may be providing good care, but the motivations behind it aren't really what it should be in this space. And I think that's where part of this reform needs to happen as well. This is a big, big problem. It's a huge issue that's not going to be solved in a single budget. And I'm quite excited to see what their first steps are going to be in this direction. But I think this is going to be something we're probably going to continue to talk about over the next few years. Just get this beast under control.
Can I make a prediction that I'm going to end up describing the steps as piss weak and so long term that they in the next elections won't have to really worry about it?
I think you're exactly right.
That's a bit black pilly, but
but I think you're probably right. I think this government has tried to do this before and doesn't want to upset people too much. And so they're going to put their kid gloves on and they're going to just snip around the edges. And I don't think too much, which I'll be very surprised if it's a major, major reform. I think. Yeah. Anything that doesn't happen within the next couple of years is basically just bullshit. Anything that comes out and says, like, if they have something saying we're going to be cutting the cost of the NDIS by $20 billion, and our plan for that is these reforms, which will start off cutting out several millions, and we're going to ramp up the program so that in 5 years we're going to be starting to cut 2 million, and then in 10 years we're going to have cut this many billion. As soon as they start doing that, I think no, rubbish, not going to happen. No. I completely agree.
Hopefully I'm wrong. I feel like I need to be wrong about this because it's just such a sinkhole.
I think this is what's so frustrating too is everybody, literally everybody knows the writing is on the wall. The NDIS providers, the participants, the government, the lay people, everybody sees this for the problem that it is. No one has the guts to actually tackle this beast. No. Well, I mean, we're jumping the gun here. They may completely reform it, and we could be wrong. But
sure, yeah. But if you want to have a charity bet with me, I'll do up to $20 with you, and I'll give you a 2-to-1 to the first 3 people if that's the size what you want to do. Contact me, Ardeet, at australiatalks@proton.me. I'll gladly take that bet.
I think you're going to win. I don't think you're going to do it. But look, stranger things have happened. We'll wait and see what happens.
Let's hope. Yeah. I'd love to see something happen. I'd love to see it and say, well, we didn't think there were any balls out there, but a couple of them are dropped.
I would hate to see the NDIS become the largest part of our budget. And I think that's a massive mistake if it gets to that point. We're almost talking defense budget levels.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I don't have a specific, I have no problem with funding disability services and healthcare and all that stuff, of course.
Nope.
But when the beast gets too big, no.
Especially when the beast is obese.
Unfortunately, yes. All right, let's get stuck into This Week in Australian History. I come from a land.
This week in Australian history, we're covering 24th to the 30th of April. April 24th in 1899, the Scottish barque, Barque, Loch Sloy is wrecked off Kangaroo Island, South Australia, killing 31 people. 1912, the government of New South Wales grants 43 acres, 17 hectares, north of Sydney Harbour for the construction of a zoological garden, later known as Taronga Zoo.
It's such a good zoo too.
Yeah, it is. It opened in 1916, and it's one of Australia's premier attractions. It is a good zoo. It's a beautiful setting and a well-managed zoo.
Yeah, I only wish it was a bit bigger. I think that's kind of its downfall. Like it's great for an urban zoo, don't get me wrong, but it would be better if it was a little bit bigger. But great day out. If you're in Sydney and you haven't been there, go. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I haven't been there for ages. 1918, the First World War, Australian and British forces counter-attacked German troops near Amiens in France, commencing the Second Battle of Villers-Bretonneux. April 25th, 1829, Captain Charles Fremantle arrives off the coast of the present-day state of Western Australia aboard HMS Challenger with the intention of establishing the Swan River colony. He claimed the west coast for Britain, preventing French annexation.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If there was less going on in France with the revolution and Napoleon, we could well have been a divided country or a French colonised country.
Alternate history. What if?
Yeah. Yeah, there must be surely someone has written a book on what would have happened if the French Revolution either had happened 50 years earlier and allowed enough money in the kitty to get Australia, or happened 50 years later, allowed them to settle Australia, and then the impact it would have had on Australia with the French Revolution and Napoleon going over there. I would imagine.
L'Australie.
Yeah.
I shudder to think.
1896, at the election in South Australia, women exercised their right to vote for the first time. They got given limited suffrage the previous year, and South Australia was the first Australian colony and one of the first places worldwide to grant women both voting and parliamentary candidacy rights. 1915, the Gallipoli campaign commences with the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, that's where we get our term ANZAC in case you're not aware of it if you're listening from OS, landed at Anzac Cove on the Gallipoli Peninsula in present-day Turkey. So the landing there became the origin of Anzac Day, commemorating the courage and sacrifice of Australian and New Zealand troops. The campaign lasted until December with heavy casualties, but it was also part of forging a national identity. And I still think instrumental in part of the, with the passage of time, it becomes almost a mythology, but it is a big part of it. 1918, in the Second Battle of Villers-Bretonneux, Australian and British troops counterattacked German forces near Amiens, France, with Clifford Sadleir later receiving the Victoria Cross for his actions. And that was a turning point against the German Spring offensive. And he captured machine guns, exemplified Anzac Nation, and it exemplified Anzac actions and contributed to Allied momentum. 1927, Anzac Day was uniformly observed in all Australian states for the first time. So 2027. 1975, the Australian Embassy in Saigon, South Vietnam's closed and staff evacuated prior to the fall of Saigon. April 26th, in 1890, Banjo Paterson's poem The Man from Snowy River is first published. 1970, Queen Elizabeth II opens the National Carillon. I always say Carillon, but it's Carillon. But it always looks like, that always sounds clumsy to me.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like,
No.
It doesn't roll off the tongue. It's
no, it doesn't. Yeah, so it's basically the big structure with a whole lot of bells. So it was a gift from the British government commemorating the establishment of the national capital. So 55 bells in the Carillon in Lake. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right either.
No, I'm pretty sure that is it. Yeah, Carillon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carillon in Lake Burleigh, Griffin. Look, sounds very nice, very pretty. But you wouldn't think that from the name.
I don't think it's the most gorgeous structure. It's kind of brutalist.
It is.
It's just like a big tower in it. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, but yeah.
It sounds better than it looks and's pronounced.
Yeah, we'll give it that.
We'll give it that, yeah. Maybe damn it with faint praise. April 27th, 1971, relics from the wreck of the Dutch East India Company ship Batavia recovered off the coast of Hoopman-Abrolhos in Western Australia. And that was a 1629. So 1629 shipwreck that involved mutiny and massacres. We covered the wreck of the Batavia in Tootick's Town Talk on Geraldton, Part 2. We did that last year, so I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. And I'm pretty sure I gave a warning at the time saying if your stomach's a bit easily turned, or you don't like the horrible things like that, don't bother listening to it. But if you're interested in what happened, it's an easily digestible accounting. April 28th in 1656, the Virgul Drake, a Dutch East India Company ship bound for the port of Batavia, now Jakarta, was wrecked south of Ledge Point in Western Australia. So survivors got to shore and led to rescue attempts and added to Dutch knowledge of the Australian coast. So, yeah, remember they were all back in the mid-1600s. So, but a few landings. Wasn't just the Palms first. 1996, in a shooting spree, 35 people are murdered by a gunman in the town of Port Arthur in Tasmania. April 29th, 1770, Captain James Cook arrives at Names Botany Bay. He was sailing aboard HM Bark Endeavour, and it was basically a botanical trip. 1952, the ANZUS Treaty, a military alliance between Australia, New Zealand and the US, hence the acronym, comes into force. 1954, the Soviet Union's embassy in Canberra is closed as a result of the Petrov affair. So that was closed following defections and espionage revelations and strayed diplomatic ties. April 30th, 1988, World Expo 88, part of the Australian Bicentenary, opens in Brisbane, Queensland. Millions of people went through that. International pavilions, entertainment, really upped Queensland's global profile. And it transformed South Bank, part of Brisbane, into a cultural precinct. So, yeah, it was actually... It was a good effort, worked well, and it had lasting benefits. Don't know how the money's worked out, but the results of it are still very positive. I know that's one of your favourites too, that the expo was up there.
Yeah, it's lasting legacy of like South Bank and the complete like reforming of Brisbane. It's got a really lasting record. And if you go to Brisbane today and you go to South Bank and all of that and QPAC and all of that, that was all built for Expo 88. And it's just absolutely fantastic. So I do wonder, because we're coming up to the 250. Well, it's not soon, but it is coming up in the next sort of decade. And I do wonder, so that'll be 2038. I do wonder if there is any plans to, probably not a World Expo because they're kind of fallen out of favour, but if there's something on the cards, perhaps. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, good call. Finally, rounding out this week in Australian history, 2006 miners Brant Webb and Todd Russell are found alive 5 days after a mine collapse in Beaconsfield, Tasmania. The dramatic rescue from the Beaconsfield gold mine captured national attention, with the men surviving in a tiny cage, and it prompted safety reviews. A third miner, unfortunately, was killed, but it was something very closely watched on Australian TV, caught a lot of our attention. And do you think, DK, that there's any chance that Brant and Todd blew the froth off to get a bit of dust out of their mouth when they got to the surface?
I can't believe that was 20 years ago, but there you go.
Yep.
100%. I know for a fact they went straight to the pub. All right, of course, that noise means it is time for the 4X bottle top question. These go in specifically in order of easiest to most difficult. And the third question, as I alluded to at the beginning, is the most difficult, but you've surprised me before. You might get this or you might get close, and I'm certain some of our listeners will probably get this one as well. So it's a bit eclectic, but it's interesting. So without further ado, the first question is, what was Melbourne almost called and is still informally called sometimes?
Batman!
Yeah, pretty much. Batmania after John Batman.
Batmania.
Yeah.
Sorry, Batmania.
Which is just so funny. If they just call it Batman. It would be fantastic. But anyway,
It is
it
amusing.
isn't. It's Melbourne.
Because of
all right.
John Batman, one of the early, was he surveyor? Was he the surveyor or family? Oh God, I only mentioned it only the other week, but yeah, he was. There was someone called Batman.
Yeah, he did a lot. He was a grazier, entrepreneur, explorer, and of course, the most famous thing I guess he was known for was very much kind of the one of the founding fathers of the city of Melbourne. So,
Yes, yeah.
pretty
he
interesting.
Killed the Joker.
Yes. Yeah. Moved to Gotham City, you know. His parents were
That's right.
unfortunately killed. Yeah.
Tragic story.
Yeah. All right. Second question. This is an interesting one. What percentage of Australian land, the continent, the country and continent of Australia, what percentage of the land is used for agricultural use? This is, the little caveat here is all agricultural uses, including grazing and things like that, which...
Oh, that's very different. Oh, great question. And I appreciate the qualifier. Because it's going to be way bigger than what people would imagine. And the reason why I'm saying that is we have got so many properties out there that are literally hundreds of thousands of hectares that don't appear to have much, but the dried grass is enough there to sustain primarily cattle and other grazing beasts, which you wouldn't even, unless someone pointed it out to you, you would think, well, there's nothing to eat there. As soon as you speak to someone and they say, well, no, look at that, they can eat that grass, they've got that amount of protein, as has been pointed out to me, suddenly you think, oh, there's actually a reasonable amount of food out here. Yeah, water's always an issue. So with that qualifier, because I was already starting to formulate my answer without that, and I was going to be leaning towards probably the 20% mark, but with the grazing and all forms of agriculture, I reckon we have to be talking somewhere between 60 to 80, and I reckon we're reasonably up. I'm going to say 68%.
Oh, that is a really good guess. I love how you reasoned this out because it is really high. It's not quite that high.
Oh, okay.
It is still a whopping 53% of the country is used for agricultural use. And like you said, the vast majority of it is essentially barren outback wasteland. But it's not wasteland. There is grazing area, and some of these cattle stations are huge. Ann Creek Station is the largest quote unquote farm in the world. It is in South Australia, up near Woomera, actually. Well, quote unquote near. This is a relative term up there. It is 23,000 square kilometres, or 5.8 million acres. Yep, it is significant. I think out of the top 100 largest cattle stations, farms, whatever you want to describe them as in the world, I think Americans, unfortunately, I know you guys got some big ones, but they don't come close. You're not even in the top 20, I don't think. Some of these stations are absolutely huge. They don't just use helicopters to go find them, as they do in other parts of the world, particularly in America and parts of Texas. We have to use planes to go find the cattle, and then they use motorbikes to get out there. Several day trips just to get to where the cattle are, because these properties are so huge. Ann Creek Station, is so big that it is larger than some countries. So, just to put it into perspective. Yep.
Oh, that's a nice little factoid.
Yep. So King Ranch in Texas is America's largest cattle station or farm, however you want to describe it. It is 830,000 acres, or 3,300 square kilometers. So just to remind you, Ann Creek Station is 5.8 million acres. So yeah, King Ranch is quite small compared to Ann Creek. But again, you got to remember the environment we're talking. There isn't a lot of grass out there, so you need a lot of room to spread these cattle out, which is pretty interesting. So
wow. Oh, that's a good question, that one.
53%. It's still very, very, very high when you consider the size of the
it's
country.
massive. Yeah.
Absolutely huge. So, last question, the most difficult question. How many borders with France does Australia have, either on land or by sea? And I'll give you a tip, because I know this is quite difficult. It is in the single digits.
Well, in fact, you said a plural is more than what I was thinking anyway. How many? Now, say the question for me again once more, please, DK.
So, how many borders with the country of France does Australia have, either on land or by sea?
Right, either on land or by sea. So
an ocean border is where obviously two countries' ocean economic zones touch, right?
So we'd have things like I'm trying to remember my geography, but it's going to be like New Caledonia, Noumea,
yes,
stuff like that.
Yes.
What is that? I'd be astounded if we've got a. Oh, actually, no, I won't be astounded if we got a land one, because I bet there's one down in Antarctica.
Yes.
So I'm going to say 4.
Yes!
Oh,
100% right. Well done.
Oh, wow.
Well done. So they are the Coral Sea, which is with New Caledonia, because of course New Caledonia is part of metropolitan France, which feels weird, but it is. That's how they do it. Heard and McDonald Islands share a sea border with the Kerguelen Islands. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I think I mispronounced that last time I talked about it. This is in the Indian Ocean, Southern Ocean, uninhabited islands. We've spoken about Heard and McDonald Islands in our Two Ticks Town Talk. If you'd like to know more, go and look at those. It's very fascinating. And in Antarctica, there is 2 land borders. We have a dispute with France about our claims in Antarctica. Currently, it's quite friendly, but, that may change in the future.
There's a risk it could turn icy.
That's right. But yes, so the total tally is 4. France traditionally isn't a country we think of as one of our neighbours, but the reality is whether you count Antarctica or not, New Caledonia is right there, and we very much are their neighbours. Heard of McDonald Islands, again, I understand people probably don't really think about them as part of the broader country of Australia, even though they very much are. But yeah, so well done. What a great guess.
God, I'm pretty chuffed with that.
Oh, you should be. That was really well done. So on that, thank you so much for joining us for another Australia Talks. As always, if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics, please get in touch with us on our email at australiatalks@proton.me. We'd also be grateful if you could subscribe and give us an honest review, as this helps us out immensely. But the best thing you can do is just share it with a friend that you think might like it. Otherwise, join us next week for another episode of Australia Talks. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to tell your mama love her.
Good on you, DK. Thank you.